much is required. So much was given to Moses, but much was required. Much was given to Jesus, but look what was required of Jesus. I'm telling you, the death on the cross was brutal. But the night that he spent in the Garden of Gethsemane preparing was just as brutal. When they spit in his face, when they pulled on his beard, right? When they beat him to the point where he was unrecognizable, right? He was faithful. Christ was faithful, but much was given to him and much was required of him. And even Peter and Paul, Paul was beheaded for the sake of the gospel. John the Baptist beheaded for the sake of the gospel, because these men of God were what? Not only were they faithful, which they were faithful to God, they were committed. They were committed. Much was given to them, but much was required. But here in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, he says what? Commit these to faithful men who will be able to teach others. In other words, think about that. When you have a faithful servant, you can trust your faithful servant with much. You can trust that when you give them directions, that they will follow those directions, right? According to the definitions we gave about faithfulness, which is following them to exactly, right? You know that when you give them an instruction, that they will follow it exactly as you have given it to them. And it will not matter whether you're present or not present. Some people will follow the instructions or the directions really, really well and exactly the way that they were spelled out, because the person that gave the instruction is present. That's not faithfulness. Faithfulness is not determined by what you do when you're being seen. Faithfulness is determined by what you do when you're not being seen. So when you can give a servant an instruction, right, and they follow that instruction exactly whether you are present or not, they're faithful. And Paul was telling Timothy, give these to people who are faithful. Because I'm going to tell you what, you would not want, for those of you that own businesses, you would not want your employee to be unfaithful, would you? You would not want your employee to act one way when you're present and then act another way when you're not. You wouldn't want to leave them a set of instructions, policies, the core values of your organization, the mission and vision of your organization go away and then come back only to find that they didn't follow any of it. Because what happens is if they don't follow it, they're actually in rebellion, and people don't like to look at it that way. But they are in rebellion, and rebellion brings confusion and destruction. And so you might have left your business or the ministry or the church to someone you thought was faithful, that you could trust, only to find out that you couldn't trust them and they weren't faithful because they didn't do things the way you asked them to do it. A faithful servant will say, it will not matter. Like when I was coming up in the church, my pastor at the time, he would go out of town and he would leave me in charge of everything as if he were there. With everything that he did, opening up the church, closing the church, bringing the message, organizing, everything that he would normally do, he left that into my care and left the people in my care. And I didn't even dare to not follow what he said. Why? Because now he didn't trust me, like in the first week and go away for a whole month. I'm not saying that. That was something that he built upon, bit by bit. But when he saw that I was faithful in the little things, he kept adding more and adding more and adding more. When Apostle met me, I was his right-hand woman, running things while he was there, not running over him, not usurping his authority, running things with him as he instructed me. Go do this, and I went and I did it. I want you to oversee this, and I went and I oversaw it. And so I found that, looking back and through scripture and different things, what he asked me to do, I was faithful to do. And so when he was out of town, the church ran as if he were there. And the only difference was I was standing in front, bringing the word, and it wasn't him. But if you looked at everything else that was running behind the scenes, it was running as if he were there. And that's faithfulness. So remember, faithfulness is not about how you are or what you do when somebody's looking. Faithfulness, even in the eyes of God, if your faithfulness is not determined by how others view you or see you, your faithfulness is determined by what God sees when nobody else is around. What's on your mind? What's going through your mind that you think nobody can see? God can see them. And is what is going through your mind, is it faithful? Does it line up with his word faithfully? Does it line up with him and his thoughts and what he wants and how he likes things done? Does it line up well? Because if it does, then you're faithful. I'm not talking about the occasional hiccup. I'm talking about a consistency. God is looking for consistency. He knows we're not perfect beings, but he's looking for that consistency. Faithfulness is being consistent. And so he was telling Timothy here, he said, hey, these, and I'm going to paraphrase this way on purpose. He said, I want you to commit this to faithful men who will be able to teach others. In other words, I do not want unfaithful men in here teaching. Because I'm going to tell you what, the unfaithful man is rebellious and the only thing he's going to teach is rebellion. But the faithful man or the faithful woman will teach faithfully. And what you want to see reproduced is what? Faithfulness. So for those of you that run a business, you would not put an unfaithful employee in charge of other employees, would you? Why? Why wouldn't you? Yeah, an unfaithful, why would you not put an unfaithful employee in charge of other employees? Rebellion would be in the camp. No better. You can't say it any better. Right. And so here Paul is telling Timothy, look, don't go looking for, I'm paraphrasing, don't go looking for unfaithful men and women to do this teaching. They have to be faithful, and those that are faithful will be able to teach others. If they can't follow instructions, do not put them in charge of anything, because they're not going to follow the instruction of the business owner or the pastor or the apostle of the ministry. They're just not going to do it. They're not going to do it. And everybody wants a position in the church. They want a position in business. They want to get promoted. They want, but they're not willing. They're not everyone, because this doesn't apply to everyone, but many are not willing to do what's required for the promotion on the job, what's required to have a leadership position in the church. Then they get frustrated and then they run. Well, see, you just proved that you are not faithful. So I was very wise in not putting you in that position. I mean, you have always been in charge of, in leadership role, and right. So what I'm saying is, you just don't want unfaithful people, right? But here's the thing: God knew He could trust Moses because Moses was faithful in all of his house. And then the beauty of it, we're going to see. I'm going to use another example. We're going to see 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, we are going to see it play out in the Old Testament. Here it is. Moses trains up Joshua. Was Joshua faithful? Here's the other beauty behind that. The people that Joshua led during the whole time that he led the people of God, they did not stray. Why? Moses was faithful in all of God's house. He trained up Joshua to be faithful in all of God's house. And so when Joshua is now responsible over the same people that Moses had, they did not stray from the Lord. Now, had Moses been unfaithful, then Joshua would have been unfaithful, and Joshua then would have not been able to lead the Israelites, right, or keep them in that faithful mode. So, when you're given instructions, whether it's coming from your boss, whether it's coming from your apostle, listen to the instruction and follow the instruction. That's a little sidebar that's not in my notes, but I thought while we're here, let me just throw that out there. Don't, just follow the way that it was given. And if you think you have a better idea, then feel free to come and share it with your apostle. All right? But remember, if you're faithful, you will teach others to be faithful, and they will teach others to be faithful. But if you're not faithful, because this happens, you're not faithful, or a person is not faithful, but they expect others to be faithful to them. But they're not faithful. All right. That was just a little Tootsie Roll. All right. Now, let's go over to, now that we've looked at what entrusting means and faithfulness means, and we used two very strong examples, which were Moses and Jesus. Let's go over to Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. Exodus chapter 2, verse 11. And I'm going to read verses 11 through 15. All right? Now it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that way. And when he saw no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Verse 13. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 Hebrew men were fighting. And he said to the one who did the wrong, why are you striking your companion? In other words, why are you striking your brother? Verse 14. Then he said, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? So Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. Verse 15. When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian. And he sat down by a well. He was tired, wasn't he? I mean, he had to run for a long time to get away from Pharaoh, because Pharaoh's kingdom extended very far. But isn't it interesting that they never found Moses to kill him, even though Pharaoh wanted to kill him for killing an Egyptian? That's food for thought, isn't it? Just like the Lord Jesus hid the Lord God hid baby Jesus when Herod was looking for him. All right, sidebar. So here we see that in Exodus 2:11 that Moses, he was 40 years old at this time. So we know the story of Moses, right? Moses, his mom raises him for a few months. Moses gets too big to continue being hidden, right? So she puts him in a basket and sends him down the river. And his sister Miriam follows it to see where the basket containing Moses goes. And Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses in the basket and draws him, and she takes him as her own. During this time, she calls for Jochebed to come and take care of Moses and raise Moses up. And who is that if not Moses' own mother? So here she does. She puts him in a basket to save his life, and she ends up raising her son, after all, not as her son in the Egyptian eyes, but he was her son. All right? So, but let me go back. So that's the story of Moses. So here we are. Now Moses is 40 years old. So Moses has been raised with the Egyptians for 40 years, right? Now he is being groomed to be the next Pharaoh, the next king of Egypt. Now that's a whole story on adoption right there, right? But anyway, so Moses comes out and he sees an Egyptian beating his brethren. So that means that Moses, somewhere along the way, in his upbringing, someone, who could that be? Someone comes and tells Moses of his call. Because Moses is not looking at the Hebrew as a slave. He's looking at the Hebrew as his brother. As his what? His countryman. So he looks out, and what is he? He's moved by compassion. Moses is moved by compassion. He looks upon their burden, and he's moved with compassion. So when he sees the Egyptian beating up on his brethren, he knows he has a call. He knows he's Hebrew, right? Now, the Bible doesn't tell us right here, but these are things that we can surmise based on what the Bible is telling us. And the Bible is telling us that when he looked out on their burdens, he was moved with compassion. I'm going to tell you right now, no Egyptian and no Pharaoh was looking upon the Hebrew people with compassion. They saw them as slaves. Moses saw them as countrymen. In other words, we are one and the same. We are brethren. So he knew he was Hebrew and that he was not Egyptian. So he knew he was adopted. Now, isn't it interesting that he knew he was adopted, but who else knew that he was adopted? Why would Pharaoh want to leave a kingdom in the hands of an adopted son? Unless he didn't know. Right? All right. So as we go on, and we go on to verse 12 in that same chapter of Exodus chapter 2, we see that Moses has a plan. And Moses' plan was to kill the Egyptian that was beating his brother. That was Moses' plan, because Moses understood, that's my brother, I'm a Hebrew, and I have this great call upon my life. And so I'm just going to take matters into my own hand. I'm going to make this about my plan. And my plan is, I have this is how I'm going to fix this. You're not going to beat up on my brethren. I'm going to kill you. But God, that wasn't God's plan. So what ends up happening is, Moses gets ahead of God. Moses gets ahead of God's plan. Moses' flesh gets in the way. And I wonder if Moses was thinking in his mind, I am doing the will of God by killing this Egyptian who's beating up on my brethren. I wonder if he was saying that. Right? So we see where Moses made his own plans, and he made plans to fulfill his plan, his call, his purpose, and his destiny. It was all about Moses. This great man who was next in line to Pharaoh's throne, this king who was raised up with Egyptian culture and Egyptian education, Egyptian preparation. He was raised up with all of that. And on the side, he's got this thing going on saying, wait, you know what? You're destined for something great. And he's like, well, yes, maybe. I'm not saying the word of saying this. Yes, I am destined for something great. I'm going to be the next Pharaoh, right? And I'm going to handle this situation when I become the next Pharaoh. But we'll see later on in the book of Hebrews where actually when he had the choice to make between Egypt, Pharaoh, king, wealth, riches, power, fame, education, and taking on the affliction of the Hebrews, which was total opposite of what he already had in his hands, what he chose. We're going to find that out in our study later on. But I won't get ahead here. All right. So all of this is happening. So do you realize that we might look at Moses and say, well, that was Moses. But do you know that we are the same way? There are things that we do in the flesh. There are things that we do out of disobedience. There are times where we get ahead of God, where we get ahead of God's timing. And sometimes we get ahead of God's timing because we're rebellious, but sometimes we get ahead because we're disobedient, but sometimes we get ahead because we lack knowledge. Sometimes we have just a portion of what we're called to do, and in our fervor and our exuberance to be famous and well known and to carry out what God has given us without the full understanding and knowledge of what He's given us, right? We go out ahead of Him and we take matters into our own hands. And then we try to work the plan of God, but we try to work it our way. And then we find out it doesn't work that way. And then we start asking ourselves all sorts of questions. What's wrong? Why isn't this working? What happened here? We start asking questions like, what's the problem? What's happening? What's going on here? What, if anything, can I do about this situation? Am I in God's will or am I out of God's will? Then we start, asking the question, is this the enemy? Am I being tested? Or is this the enemy trying to destroy me? All right. Then we start asking ourselves all sorts of questions like, what can I do to solve this? Then we begin to seek the Lord out, right? And we begin to pray. And to what? Pray to find out, am I in your will? Am I out of your will? What's going on here? What's happening? Can you give me some insight on this, Lord? Can you reveal to me what exactly is going on? Can you tell me why am I in this predicament? Why am I in this situation? Am I doing this? Or are you doing this? Or is the enemy doing this? How did I get here? Do we ask ourselves those questions? I think we do. But we don't have to raise our hand on that one. So if we drop down, right, to verses 12 and 13, we see where Moses made what I would call premature decision. When you take a look at Exodus 2, 12 and 13, I would say, right, in the caption, premature decisions. His will led him to make a premature decision. The fact that he didn't have all the information led him to make a premature decision. Sometimes we make premature decisions, because we don't have all the information. We have a portion of the information. Oh, well, I'm going to make this happen. God said I'm going to do this, so I'm going to make it happen. Yes, but wait a minute. But did He tell you how? Did He give you a step-by-step of how this was going to pan out, how you were to carry this out? Or did He just give you a little piece and then you cut Him off and you didn't let Him finish the rest? And now you're in this premature decision-making mode and you've taken this into your own hand and now you're making all sorts of decisions. Some of the decisions that you're making are wrong decisions. And what's happening? Your decision, you're seeing that the things that you're making decisions on are actually failing. You're maybe now asking, well, wait a minute, why is this not working? Why is this failing? Could it be that you're working your plan and not God's plan? Just like Moses. Moses was trying to do God's plan outside of God and do it his way. And what did it cost him? It almost cost him his life. He had to go, he had to run, and he had to hide. Why? Because when we try to do things prematurely or we try to do them ahead of God, let me tell you what will happen. There will come a time where something will be exposed and there will be a consequence as a result of that exposure. As a result of the things that you were doing secretly. Moses killed that Egyptian, he killed him in secret and he was trying to maintain the secret and God was not going to let the secret ride. It had to be exposed. Because had it not been exposed, Moses wouldn't have taken off into the backside of the desert. And we're going to take a closer look at that later in the series. So, Moses was what? Working his plan. And his plan exposed him. Now, his brethren and the king, or the Pharaoh, right, found out about the killing that took place. What was the consequence? Well, first of all, Moses' plan, the way he was working it, failed, right? But not only did it fail, he had to now what? Run away. And then he had to run what? Into hiding. How many of us have gotten ahead of God? We've been exposed, and then we run away, we flee, we hide, and we avoid the person or the people or the situation that we acted upon prematurely, right? We ran away. Now we're avoiding all of that. We're hiding from it. We're running from it. Maybe we're not running as Moses ran, but we run by turning our backs on it, by turning our backs on them, by turning our backs on the situation. We're hiding it. And so God is not going to let us continue hiding. He's not going to let us continue in that vein, because that will not, it's not going to produce anything positive in us. It's not going to produce anything positive in our lives. And it's not going to help us fulfill the purpose, the call, and the destiny that God has for us. It's just not going to do it. So Moses runs away. And if we go down to verse 21, same chapter, if we go down to verse 21, it gives us a pretty good picture of where Moses is now. Not only where he is, but where he is physically and where he is mentally. Because it says, then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah his daughter to Moses. So we see where Moses is in the desert. Moses is content, and he's content with what? The status quo. And God, let me tell you something. We may run and we may hide from the situation, and then we become comfortable with the status quo. We become complacent. And then God has to come in and kind of shake things up there, because he's not going to leave us in a place of complacency. Because we could be hiding on the backside of the desert and be complacent in the hiding. But I'm going to tell you what, the call of God will find us wherever we are, and the call of God will call us out. No matter how hard we try to go and hide, the call of God will find us out. Why? Because it's the call of God. It's coming from God. Nothing can hide from God. You can't hide from God. I can't hide from God. The mountains can't hide from God. Your call can't hide from God. There is nothing about you. There is nothing on the face of this earth. There's nothing in the galaxies, in the solar system, in the planet system. There's nothing in the universe. There's nothing in the Milky Way. There's just nothing in existence that can hide from God, because it came from God. God knows where everything is, where everyone is. He knows where we are in our thought process, where our heart is. He knows everything about everything. Nothing is hidden from him. Therefore, if the call is from him, the call will find you. And then the call will call you out. How do I know that? Because the Bible tells me by looking at Moses' life. So in verse 21, we see where he's content. I call it complacent. He's just, hey, I'm comfortable. Hey, life is good. I got an amazing father-in-law. I have a wife. I have sons. I mean, I'm eating. I got a roof over my head. I have clothes. I have livestock. I have money. Hey, they know me in this little village. Life is good. Why disrupt what's good? Well, God is going to come in and disrupt it, because even though that's good, that's not God's best for you. I love this. All right. So we see where he was content dwelling with the man. That's what verse 21 says. He was content to live with the man. He was comfortable in his dwelling on the backside of the desert. Because the Bible, in I think it's chapter 4, Exodus chapter 4, it says that he was on the backside of the desert. So what did Moses do? He went on with life. And maybe Moses forgot that he was a wanted man. Maybe. But here's what's interesting. When we do these things outside of God's plan and God's timing, guess what? We run away from it. We hide in the desert, on the backside of the desert. we go on with life, this new life, but not the God kind of life, right? We go on with life, and then we forget and we stop pursuing what God has for us. We stop pursuing that call. We stop pursuing the things that will what? That will bring us to that call, that will manifest that call in our lives. We stop looking for those signs. Moses didn't show signs of wanting to pursue his call. Think about that. And this happens to us when we try to do God's plan our way, or let me put it another way. When we try to ignore God's plan and we just try to do our own plan. See, we could do God's plan our way, or we can do no plan of God and just do our way. But in either case, when we try to work our own plans, guaranteed we will be what? Found out. We will be exposed. There will be consequences. We'll run. We will hide. All right. Because very few people will come and say, hey, I messed up. God, I messed up. Help me. Can you help me fix this, Lord? We will usually run and we'll hide, and we will forget about the plans of God. And in some cases, we'll even forget about God. We'll forget about church. We'll forget about studying the word. We'll forget about God. We'll forget about seeking him out. Why? Because everything I tried in my own strength, in my own power. It was my own plan, and it failed. And because it failed, I'm not going to try again. Some people say, well, I failed so many times. Why even try? I'm so glad that Abraham Lincoln didn't think that way, because then we would not have the Emancipation Proclamation. All right. And so, it is important that we understand the life of Moses, not to sit in judgment of Moses, not to criticize Moses, but to learn from Moses and learn. I've got choices I can make. I'm either going to work God's plan God's way, or I'm going to work God's plan my way, or I'm just going to abandon God's plan and just come up with my own plan. And I wonder if Moses, being on the backside of the desert, being content, living with Jethro and Zipporah and her sisters and his sons, if that was just Moses shifting from God's plan to Moses' plan. I wonder. But God is always making lemonade out of our lemons. All right. So if we go down to verse 23, it says, now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. Verse 24. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And I hate to end it here, but I'm going to end it with this. When we take a look at Exodus chapter 2, verses 23 and 24, when we take a close look at this, we see what? A delay. How do I know that? God heard their groaning. God remembered. Had Moses, maybe, if Moses would have sought God for God's plan, right? But everything works out in the timing of the Lord, right? Could it be that he would have already been prepared? So when this crying and this groaning comes out, God cannot just send him. Could it be? But there was a delay. When Moses did what he did, it caused him to go to the backside of the desert, and it caused a delay. Not in God's plan, because God's plan will always go on, but it caused a delay in what? In Moses' life.
We hope you have enjoyed the Fire in You program. Please feel free to share this empowering message with family and friends, and visit us at our webpage at www.seedofnationsinternationalcenter.org. That's www.seedofnationsinternationalcenter.org. And please feel free to share your prayer request, testimony, or partner with us through your tax-deductible giving. Your donation will help us continue delivering inspiring messages to nations. You may also subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the subscribe button. To receive alerts of future Fire New programs, just press the notification button. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For additional articles, please visit and subscribe to our blog at sonpropheticvoice.wordpress.com. That's sonpropheticvoice.wordpress.com. Until next time, friends, remember, the fire is in you.